This is one of the most exciting things I've ever done on BookTube. I'm Sean the Book Maniac, by the way, and welcome to my channel. And Bob, why don't you welcome them to yours?
Hello, I'm Bob, over at Bob the Bookerer.
Bob the Bookerer, say that 3 times. And we are here to chat with the preeminent South African novelist, Mphuthumi Ntabeni, Impush, joining us from Cape Town. Welcome, Impush.
Thank you very much, guys, for inviting me into your channel. It's really an honor for me because I am an avid watcher of both your channels. So I'm quite excited to be here.
Well, your check is in the mail from both London and Tokyo, so thank you for that. And we're here to talk about your second novel, which came out in the summer of 2021, The Wanderers, which Bob and I have both read and loved. It's always a bit dicey when you invite an author to come onto your channel to chat about a book that you haven't read yet, but boy, we hit the jackpot this time because I thought it was a very fine, an excellent, a 5-star novel. And I would say it's such a densely layered, historical, philosophical, personal, emotional, and spiritual, the layers of that was a real feat. It's maybe not a book that would be for everyone, but it certainly was a book that was an absolute joy for me to read and gave me many fabulous headaches.
I'm happy to hear that. I love for my readers to be co-authors, so I want them to work also like me.
Absolutely, absolutely. I have been Googling you today, Umpush, and I found an article that you wrote for the Sunday Times, a South African newspaper, about this book and about the writing process or about your writing philosophy or whatever. And I'd like to start with a quote here. You wrote, "In The Wanderers, I wanted protagonists whose strength of character enables them to stand naked before the elements of life, for them to face reality stripped of everything except that which ultimately matters, love, memory, and the power of their minds." And I would love for you to kind of jump off that quote and introduce the novel to the people watching.
Thank you for that. The novel itself is a novel of memory. It's about a dying man looking back in his life and trying to see how he lived his life, if it was worth it, the choices he made. But then also, if you are a Black South African, you have had the experience of growing up under apartheid and colonialism. And then you find out that the worldview of your own people it was truncated when the colonialists came, and then it was not taken serious. So for me, the book itself, a process of rediscovering that which is part of my Xhosa culture that was looked down from during the colonial era, and then trying to find a way of putting it together organically so that it redefines my identity as a Xhosa person. So basically, that is why I say it's a novel of memory, but also it's a novel of trying to rediscover your own identity.
Rediscover, I like that verb, and kind of create out of all of the literature and the philosophy and the experiences and the history. Introduce us to the two main characters, Pax and his daughter, Ruru.
Yeah, the thing I share with Pax, which is Pagamile Maseti, the main character, one of the main characters, is a love of classical literature, which is why I made him to have a degree in classical literature. So he uses that. He actually uses books, basically, but especially classical literature, to look and express his own life, to find ways of speaking about his spiritual experiences, his historical experiences, his need for finding identity. And then it's also, I was trying to express the notion of home, what it means to belong somewhere or not to belong somewhere. Another thing I share with Pax is that in my thinking and then in my intellectual process, I'm an internationalist. So I aspire after what Goethe calls the world literature. And I find that by anything that is human, it speaks to me. So I become a little bit worried when people think the process of decolonizing, for instance, literature means that we must disregard, for instance, the Western canon. No, I don't think so, because a lot of that is valuable in the Western canon, even if at some stages it was used in a prejudicial way against us as people who were not from the West. I worry when people try to throw the baby with the dirty water, because I still find a lot of that is valuable in Western canon also. As I said, anything that is human speaks to me because I'm human also.
Bob, how would you like to start talking to Push?
I find that really interesting, and I wanted to build on that because that's the sense I got from the book as well, was that there was a real love for books, for perspectives, for so many other things in there. And I think I was really struck by a passage sort of towards the end, thinking about what you were saying, where characters are talking about the process of having been colonized and sort of the identification with, some people sort of saying like, oh, we're not Swahili English, more sort of Swahili Deutsch. And then there's sort of these sort of layering kind of perspectives of sort of how people see their identity within it. And so I'm sort of curious within that, is that something that kind of unfurled as you were writing the book, and or something that sort of was revealed to you, or was that something that you went into the book quite intentional about?
Let me just say, the book itself, its origins are quite far. But then by the time I was finishing it, I was finishing it under the conditions of the pandemic. And then we were all a little bit scared. And then we were all trying to find comfort in the small things that we could. And I realized for me that the comfort I was getting was from reading. And so I started thinking that I wonder if books can be able to raise a person, which is what I was doing with Ruru. Basically, Ruru, it was raised by books. And then I was like, it is actually possible to find a way of expressing your own life through books. And then you learn how to interact with other people through books. Because if anything, books are good at is teaching us empathy. And then you find that people who read are very empathetic because they understand or they have an idea of other people's point of view. And then books are very good in that. So basically, that's what I was saying, that Sean was quoting this thing from the Sunday Times, that in Africa, as a result, most of the time, when people are scared, they look into religion. And then it's not even authentic religion. It's a fly-by-night religion. It's basically superstition, if I tell you the honest truth. It's by superstition, I mean it's cultic kind of, just you follow the cult without thinking about the faith that you are following. And as a result, you see that there are these pastors, fly-by-night pastors, who are making people do things like eat grass, drink petrol. It's pathetic, actually. People in Africa have lost faith in the power of politicians to solve things. And then in our closer culture, this thing happened during the time of colonialism, when people lost faith on their chiefs and then they started believing false prophets and all those things. And this is exactly what is happening now. People are just following false prophets and all that stuff. So to bridge that void that has been lost by that faith in politics and all those things. And this is a reason I actually chose Tanzania, because this phenomenon in Tanzania is even much more advanced there than here. Because people who get elected, who become presidents, they come from the background of the churches, these born-again churches, you understand? And I see that happening here in South Africa also. And it scares me, because the behavior of people who do that is like almost an unthinking behavior, like they follow people like cult leaders. It's not even religion per se, to be honest. It's cults.
Wow. Okay, so I think we should maybe say a little bit more about the opening premise. How about I take a stab at it and then push you if I screw something up or if you want to add anything. But the opening premise of the novel is that the father, Pax, he was a ANC freedom fighter, and he fled South Africa, maybe late 70s. Would that be about right?
Yes, late 70s, early 80s.
Early 80s?
Mm-hmm.
Early 80s, probably. I think you're right. Of course, you're right. You're the author. And he had to save his life, save his skin. But he had left a girlfriend who was pregnant, who he loved, and had no choice because he had to get out. And then he went into exile, and he was all over the places, and we won't give more details than that. But at the time that the apartheid regime was dissolved and Mandela was freed, and the election and stuff, he opted not to come back. So he stayed in Tanzania. So he never had any physical for face-to-face connection with his girlfriend, who became a single mother, or Ruru, the daughter. He never met her. And so she's the other character. And in the timelines that are closer to the present, we see her both as a teenager and then as a woman in her late 30s who becomes a doctor. And she I think she has found out that her father died. I think he died in about 1999. And she is trying to make peace with and trying to find out about her father. So that's the opening premise. Was that a fairly good summary?
I think you got it, and I couldn't have done it better myself. The only thing perhaps I must say as an author, I'm glad you associated with the ANC, because I think Parks never tell us that he joined the ANC. He always tells us about the organization.
The organization, yeah.
So we don't know which organization, in case somebody out there is waiting to. But I'm just joking. It's obvious which organization he joined, but I was deliberate by not mentioning it. And because I grew up under the ANC myself, so I knew the things that I needed to say that were discomforting, and it pained me to say that. But what are we if, as writers, we don't say uncomfortable truths?
I remember after listening to a podcast episode that you were on with Damon Galgut and another writer talking about South African literature and about your own novels. I listened to that interview. It's fabulous. I'll put a link in the show notes. And I said to you, you're a bit of a shit disturber. You love to stir everything up and very confrontational, but in a way that's very humanistic, and not only humanistic, but humane. And that that informs, that infuses your novel as well, that you inject a lot of politics and very controversial or very strong views, but it is all filtered through very full-bodied characters. So that, I think, is quite an achievement. Pan-African. Tell us a bit about this novel. It's a South African novel, but it's more than that. And I think I've seen you use that adjective, Pan-African. So talk a little bit about that aspect of the novel and that aspect of your motivations as a writer.
Yeah, the thing is, you're right when you're saying it was deliberate for me to make it Pan-Africanist, because there's a tendency among the South Africans of thinking that they are not part of the continent. The South Africans, most of the time, or especially the ones who are educated and all that stuff, they're always looking west. And you can see even the Cape Town, the city itself is looking west, and it has its back to Africa. But then, seriously, I wanted to show that us South Africans, we are part of this continent, and this continent is part of us. And there isn't us without this continent. So I was very deliberate about using the culture and the histories of other countries in the Southern Africa. The cultures and the histories I know a little bit of, because the thing about us in South Africa is that we are very claustrophobic. Because of the apartheid, we're not given opportunities to travel and all that stuff. So our mindset is very limited to what we see within South African life. And so it is my opinion that these ideas of xenophobia, for instance, they come from that claustrophobic thinking of South Africans, or thinking that they are not part of Africans and all that stuff. Like, I'll just make an example. If you were to come here from Tokyo or from Canada or from the UK, and you are white, and then they treat you with respect, of which we should treat everybody with respect. But if you're coming from Zimbabwe or Tanzania and all that stuff, and all of a sudden he's come to take our jobs and blah, 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 and all that nonsense. So it's very irritating, this mindset of Black South Africans in particular. So I think it's incumbent upon us as writers to try and counteract that, and to show, and the only way you can do is to show that, but we also as South Africans are part of Africa, and then we interact, we intermarry. And that's the thing that people who went to exile, it opened their minds because they had to stay in Lusaka, they had to stay in Zimbabwe, they had to stay in Tanzania. So it opened their minds. They knew that they were part of a much more bigger continent than just South Africa. I don't know if you follow our news here. There is a young politician we call Malema. Malema he broke away from the ANC. I think it's 13 years ago. He used to be a leader of the ANC Youth League. And now he's got his own party that is called the Freedom Fighters, Economic Freedom Fighters. They are probably the only party that politically is growing here in South Africa. All the other parties are actually regressing. He is African nationalist and radical and militant. And then for some reason these days, and I'm sure, Bob, you'd know in the UK, the conservatives seems to be the ones that are growing. And so these days in politics, if you come with a radical message, those are the only parties, the same in the US also. If you come with radical message that is a little bit militant, and then people will follow you, it doesn't matter how wrong you are. So he's got a case that was opened by AfriForum. And AfriForum is an African ultra-right organization that, by the way, also I forgot, that is growing fast also here. And but it's only it mostly attract white conservatives, the Afrikaners and all those things. They opened a case against him of a hate speech. By hate speech, I mean what they did. There is a song that was sung during the years us when we were still agitating against apartheid that goes by Dubuli Bulu, which means by shoot the Boer, shoot the African. You understand? So Malema still sings that song. And then the Afrikaner Forum say it's hate speech because if you say such things now, post-94, it connotates hate speech. So it's quite an interesting case that everybody is watching here now. It's televised on the TV all the time. But to cut the matter short, where I was going with is like, when I listened to him talk about how disillusioned by the ANC, by the land not coming back to the people, to the natives of South Africa and all that stuff, the disappointment, I was laughing. It seemed as if he was reading Parks.
I'm going to say I'm not familiar with that name, but also probably because you're pronouncing it correctly, I can't recognize it, and maybe I have seen it in print. So that's quite possible. Over to you, Bob.
I'm really interested by what you said and how that kind of connects to the various sorts of points of view throughout the book. I was really interested by the fact that, some of what we're told is through writing in the sort of form of a sort of diary and excerpts. Some is sort of through letters, and those also I was really interested by the fact that a lot of it is in is in the second person of you, blah blah blah, you. And so I'm sort of curious about the sort of decision as you are writing to kind of incorporate those multiple points of view, and particularly to kind of use things like the second person or use written documents sort of within that. What was sort of your thinking as you were writing it?
Yeah. Okay, thanks for asking this question. Another advantage I have is that I never went to writing schools and all those things. So I do not know when I'm breaking the rules. And then, like, everybody was horrified when they were like, you never write on the second person personality. How could you? Because for me, the most important thing, because I don't even know the rules of writing, I write as I hear it in my head. Culturally also, I'm still closer to the oral tradition of telling stories. So when I write, I must first hear it. And then if it sounds good on my head when somebody says it, and then for me, it's fine. So I don't know when I'm breaking the rules. And then I'm not breaking the rules. And then I was like, let's just do it and see if it's gonna work. The thing I was quite cognizant of was the fact that there's going to be about basically three voices here. So I wanted a reader to know which voice is reading at the particular time so that it does not confuse about who's speaking now and all those things. So I wanted you to know that, but immediately it's speaking on a second person personal. Then we're talking about now it's Ruru who's saying that. And then when it's talking on the first person, then you know that that's probably Parks talking. You understand? So that I wanted to make life easier for the reader so that the reader can follow me quite easily. And like, for instance, you talked about Galgut's book with All Three of Us Love, The Promise. But at some stage when I was reading it, I found it very demanding, that shift within the passage, within the sentence of the voices. And I'm like, sometimes I'll find myself rereading and like, where am I now? I don't know where am I. And then I reread again. But then I think he was doing that deliberately also, because when you reread, now, you gain more because you already know what is going to happen. And then you find yourself that you gain more. But yeah, for me, I wanted to make the reading process of the book easier for the reader, which is the reason why I chose those voices. And then I was also quite cognizant of the fact that Parks can be tiring to a reader because he is complaining, he is sad. So I wanted to infuse it with the energy of young Ruru, so that there are those positive moments when Ruru comes and talk about her life and all those, so that the reader doesn't become too tired of Parks complaining all the time, if you know what I mean.
Sure, I do. And also that there's very vivid, wonderful recollections of him as a young boy and young man that balance out the, I wouldn't say curmudgeonly, but the little bit more jaded and cynical older man. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I understand the jadedness, but I think we must kind of accept the fact that is a little bit cynical. Also, I don't run away from that, because I think it was made like that by his life experiences. I think another thing I was quite wary of, I didn't want him to use his jadedness and then blame other people. I wanted him to own up to things that he himself had done. So this is the reason why I was saying I wanted him to stand up as a man and not hide under religion or hide under even the part you were talking about, philosophy and all those things. I mean, I do read a lot of philosophy, but I wanted to chop it down into proper sentences, not philosophical writing, into proper literature sentences, so that a person who doesn't read philosophy or who doesn't read theology doesn't become bored with the language, because the language of philosophy and theology sometimes tend to be turgid and all those things. So I wanted him to speak clearly about how he feels about his life, where he is, and why it happened. And the parts of him as a young boy, those parts are very auto-fictional kind of, because I was born in Queenstown. So I learned him those experiences, my experiences of growing up in that area. And then I'm always quite wary of what happens here in South Africa. We tend to talk about the 76 generation, and then the exile generation, and then the post-94 generation. And then we tend to forget about the people who actually grew up under the apartheid. And then they treat us as if we're a lost generation, as if there was nothing that actually happened during the 80s. And then in my thinking, I think we were actually the people who actually bore the brand of the apartheid. And then I wanted to show people another thing that we tend to shy away from, the confusion that was happening in our townships, how we ended up being our own worst enemies also while we were facing the enemy that was in the apartheid system. But then we also ended up being our worst enemies, because I know a lot of people who ended up being killed by the people who were supposed to be their liberators. And then we tend to shy away from that. We pretend as if those things never happened. And then I talked about, as us as readers, it is our duty, that's my belief, to talk about these uncomfortable truths, and then especially these unhealthy silences.
That's really interesting to me, I think, because that really came across, that I sort of was thinking as I was reading, particularly as we get to sort of the later part of the book, that it would be so easy for characters to sort of slip into sort of bitterness and to this sort of, it kind of to become almost uncontrollably sort of bleak for them. But I really appreciated how you took what was happening with those characters, and like you said, sort of made him sort of face up to it. He didn't really have room to sort of feel too sorry for himself, or to feel bitter, or to sort of blame it too externally. There was a sense of trying to work out his own role within everything now and what he was going to do next, that I thought was really quite poignant. And I think that, without giving away anything towards the end of the book, I found the end of his part really quite touching, how it kind of navigated that and sort of looking forward to sort of inevitable things with an acceptance, I guess, sort of happening in the book. So thank you. I thought that was such a beautiful part of the book.
Absolutely. And I
Yeah.
would just add to that I think that you pull it off in a really beautiful way, because there is all of that political, philosophical, spiritual stuff, that there are negative components to it, but that it's also, I'm not sure if the word is balance, but that there is a counterpoint in his personal life, so that he has found love. And we won't say any more than that, but he has found love, and he has found a sense of interpersonal peace that he didn't have throughout his life. And he also has very personal regrets that have to do with his previous girlfriend, the mother of his daughter, and about never having a relationship with his daughter. And I think all of that just fits together in a way that was, dare I say, magical.
Thank you very much, guys, for that. And then you're such a brilliant readers. But of course, the thing that was paramount when I was trying to think about his character, I'm a fan of Albert Camus, and then the radical honesty that he approaches everything in. So I wanted to create him as an ideal of a Camus character, somebody who doesn't necessarily believe in anything, but will not dismiss anything at the same time. It's like, whatever comes, I will face it the way it comes with my own character. But as long as I don't have evidence of it, then let's park it.
I would like to start to talk about the title of this novel, The Wanderers, and I would like to start to talk about history, because one of the really potent and predominant threads of this story is history, and specifically Xhosa history. But in fact, even that is broken down and made richly complicated. So Pax ancestors, or Pax descends from a group of Black South Africans that eventually got assimilated into Xhosa, but they were the Fango or Fingo people, spelled F-E-N-G-U or F-I-N-G-O, that were a tribe that actually, previous to that, if I understand it, and I probably don't understand it completely, were actually more ethnically related to the Zulu people before that. And then we're talking about, this all happened in the 19th century. But the word Fango,
the word Fango,
it comes from a word that I'm going to try to pronounce, Ukemfenguza, which means the wanderers. And to wander about seeking service, according to Wikipedia. And if it's in Wikipedia, it must be true. But so please take that and do with it what you will. But I found that part, because I don't know anything about, I'd never heard of the Fangu people, the Fingo people, and I didn't know very much about Xhosa people. But that, the way that you stitched in that history and then made it so personal for him, and for all the personal stories in this novel, was really a triumph. So say what you want about all that.
Thank you very much, and thank you for Googling the history of Amamfengu. By the way, I am Mfengu myself, so that part was easier for me because it was personal, and I have aspirations of writing the history of Amamfengu one day. So I am collecting that history. Unfortunately, because we're a dispersed people, are probably the only tribe that even doesn't have a king or royalty, because our royalties were killed during the Mphuthumi Wars. The Mphuthumi Wars were like the wars that created Ushaka as the ultimate king of the Zulu nation. But even Ushaka, then, you are right when you say we are much more associated with that side, because we were fleeing from those wars, and this is the reason why we came down to the Eastern Cape. And then when we got to the Eastern Cape, our forefathers were called Amamfengu, which basically means the blighted wanderers. You understand? Because they were hungry, they didn't own anything, we had no cattle. And then Amaxhosa actually used to call us their dogs. But by that, they mean that they use us as people who look after their cattle, like dogs. Amamfengu got into the Eastern Cape almost at the same time when the white settlers got there. So it was easy for Amamfengu to collaborate with the British because they were treated kind of in a slavish manner by Amaxhosa. And then they stole the cattle of Amaxhosa like the British, and they stole the land of Amaxhosa like the British, because the British, whenever they had been at war with Amaxhosa, they will take some land, and then a piece of it, they will give it to their allies, Amamfengu. I doubt if the British would have been able to defeat the Xhosas had Amamfengu not been there. Because honestly speaking, the Amaxhosa were just too many of them. And then the British were quite small. And the British were really not committed, if you must remember, they were really not committed to Africa as a colony. The British were actually 5 to ditching out the Cape Colony because they thought it was just an expensive venture. They were not committed to it. They were fighting too many wars. You must remember, they were fighting with Russia, the Crimean War then. So the thing about the frontier wars with Amaxhosa, for them, it was just basically something they did on the side. And as a result, even the battalions that they sent on the Cape Colony were ones of poor thing. They used to send mostly the Scottish here. You understand? And as a result, you'd find that almost these towns in Eastern Cape are full of Scottish names and rivers and all those things. So I read that history for this project that I'm thinking of doing. But now and then when I'm writing the novels, it overflows into it. And he himself had left the country during the late 70s, early 80s. And then he became a wanderer himself. So it was easy for me to make that link. And then I extended that link, of course, into the first wanderer, which was the Homeric times, because I'm a classical reader. I love classical landos and I love Homer in particular. And of course, because I'm also you have already said that there's a lot of kind of religious faith on it. So there was no way I could avoid the quintessential wanderer, which is the founder of the Jewish religion, Abraham. And then due to that, the Christian religion, which is quite popular in South Africa. So it was very nice to intertwine and put all those things together. And then as a result, this is why I say to you, I'm an internationalist. So whatever explains or expounds my identity, I include. You can use the religious myths or these stories to enhance and expand on your knowledge of your own self. This is what I was trying to say when I say I'm an internationalist. I want to taste books. I want to remember them. I want to smell them. You understand? I like books that give me that sense of life.
Pax is a wanderer in his own life, and he is fascinated by the history of wanderers, like you say, people of the Jewish faith. He is also captivated by wanderers in nature, especially birds.
Yes, yes. I don't know if so, because most people like to ask me what is the significance of that crow on the cover. And I always try to dodge that question because, but funny enough, when my publisher and I were talking about designing the cover of the book, I said, the only thing I would like the book to have, it's a man who feels a little bit lonely, and then there must be crows or a crow.
It's a fantastic cover, and I didn't keep it necessarily in the front of my mind because I was reading it on ebook, which is the only way I can get it to. But yes, I just brought it up here, and it is the perfect cover. Bob, what do you have to say for yourself or ask?
No, I think that's really interesting. I sort of was also just wondering about, you sort of touched on it a bit earlier, the sort of choice to bring the book into sort of current times with sort of mentioning coronavirus and sort of mentioning COVID and that in the book. You sort of spoke about being an internationalist. I think it's interesting because so much of the book, had sort of very specific areas it was focusing on, and then at the end to sort of broaden out into a sort of global pandemic and sort of the characters' sort of first understandings of it. I was sort of curious what the thinking was to include that.
Initially, we had planned that the book will end in 2009. That was the initial time span. And it was also not accidental that I made Parks to die in 1999. So I wanted it to end in 2009. Of course, you know the feelings we had in 1999. We thought the world was ending because whatever. And then I realized when we were doing other things on the book, by the way, my publisher had to put down her foot because the book was quite bigger than this. We must have shaved off a third of it out. You understand? So we decided to stick into only the parts that were going to be directly affecting Parks. So that, because I wanted a richer life for instance, Nosipo's mom. I wanted to bring her character out also. So initially I had done something like that. I actually, if I may reveal this to you.
We won't tell anyone.
I haven't told anybody this. The parts, Bob, you spoke about the second persona. Those were the parts that were going to be told by Ruru's mom. So that you was going to be Ruru's mom initially. So initially I wanted all two of them to talk, but then the book was too long and my publisher was a little bit, and then she was like, well, South Africans get a little bit irritated once the book is beyond 300. So they're like, this book is too long. It's too long. So we have to shave that. So if there is anything I still am a little bit, just a tinsel little bit aggrieved about, is that I felt that I didn't portray Ruru's mom's character very well. But of course, I had to sneak it in between Ruru's remembrance and Park's remembrance, of which I think it still stayed very well. Initially, we decided to keep the parts of Ruru's childhood sweetheart because it was not going to make any meaning because we had already introduced him at the start of the novel. And so now if we don't put him and then tell the readers what happened to him, it felt as if we're just using him as a cipher. You understand? And so I had to extend it a little bit to that. I know other people say it increases the tension and the mystery on the book to leave the reader wondering, but I think it was going to be a little bit cruel not to tell the reader what happened to Hlumelo, which is Ruru's young sweetheart. So it was necessitated by that to extend it to the pandemic years. But then I decided that I don't want to talk about the pandemic. So we just ended it on the fear that it's coming. I just left it as that hanging cloud, if you know what I mean.
Absolutely. But also there's something about the thematics of wandering and COVID that really dovetail quite profoundly.
I agree.
And just leaving it at that, there's danger in how much wandering across the globe we do that COVID is showing us unfortunately. So that I thought was a really nice touch at the very end. And also your comments about Ruru's mother, I think that you do show her by her absence through the unsent letters, the letters that her daughter is writing to her, and also Pax memories of her. And I think it's a very beautiful portrayal of his what is it, paper wife, Maman or Ifua. My last question, so you've given me a great segue into my last question, which is, I think this is a really satisfyingly and powerfully anti-misogynist novel. I would maybe even possibly say feminist novel, but I'd like you to talk about how you managed to pull that off and portray such well-rounded, fully embodied female characters and interrogate, which is a word I hate to use, but I just did, interrogate misogyny in South Africa.
Yeah, thanks for that compliment. I really am honored to hear you say that. And especially when I talk with my female readers, And then they are so well impressed by how rounded the female characters. That makes me very happy, because I was a little bit not sure about that. You know how women are always accused of othering female characters. So I really tried. And I think I was lucky in a sense that in my life, I grew up under a lot of female influence. And then so there's a lot of females around me, sisters, mothers, aunts, and all those things. So I think I was lucky in that sense. And when I was writing this book, I thought I was going to write a love story, actually. I thought I was going to write a simple love story. And I wanted to write a feminine book. But then I couldn't help myself, because whenever I write, that like history always overflows into it, because I read quite a lot of history. So I can't help myself. I knew that I had lost the plot when I decided that Parks is not going to come back to South Africa, because I knew that now I will have to give reasons. And then immediately when I decided for him that he was going to have a sweetheart that comes from Rwanda, I knew that now I'm complicating my life now. You understand that? But then there is something that has always haunted me, that in 1994, when South Africa was gaining its freedom, its democratic freedom, we were so excited and happy that the future looked bright. I myself personally was just out of university. So everything was we were happy and all those things. We completely missed what was happening in Rwanda. I tell you the honest truth, we did not know what was happening in Rwanda. And I have always felt a little bit guilty about that such a genocide could happen so close to us, and then we will miss it altogether. So when I complicated my life, I was giving myself a task of actually learning what actually happened there in Rwanda. And then it led to me actually initially, because I thought Parks was going to go to Lusaka, but then I had to find a country that has borders with Rwanda, which is the reason why I chose Tanzania. And luckily, MK soldiers in Tanzania also. And then I went there. We even have a college that is called Solomon Mahlangu College. It exists there. And then most of the South Africans that were in exile, they used to go there for school. There is even like there at the beginning about the graveyard and all that stuff. That graveyard exists for real. It's not something I made up.
This has been an absolutely incredible conversation, brilliant, very, very stimulating, and I hope that we can chat about your next book or your first book, or chat about South African literature, Pan-African literature. I hope you'll come back, but this has been absolutely extraordinary. Yes, we're going to have a bite-sized book chat about that in the very near future.
No, I'm hoping that we'll have a talk about this. And then when we talk about it, it's called the Oka people. Yeah. Those are the Xhosa people. And then it was published in the 60s by Noni Jabavu. And Sean and I'm sure in the near future, we're going to talk about it.
I believe as soon as next weekend.
Yeah, it is also talking about the anthropology kind of the Xhosa culture and all those things. It's a very rich book itself. I loved it.
Well, yeah, thank you so much. It's been lovely to speak to you. I'm now going to change my channel name to Bob the Wanderer. But thank you so much. It's been fascinating, and I think it's so interesting to hear your sort of process and your thoughts behind the book itself as well. So thank you so much.
Well,
thanks for having us, Sean.
I don't want to be outdone by Bob the Wanderer, so I maybe will change my channel name to Sean the Book Wanderer. Push. Thank you so much.
We've got Bob the Wandering Booker.
There you go.
That was lovely. Thank you very much.